Hey y'all, Kayleen here. I'm going to show/explain to you how to play Romantic on the drums. So some kind of basic-ish, music theory-ish stuff about the song Romantic is that it is in the time signature of 4/4. That means we have 4 beats per measure, and the note value that each beat gets is a quarter note. You can then subdivide quarter notes into eighth notes. So where there were 4 quarter notes per measure, there are a possibility of 8 eighth notes in that measure. You can then further subdivide eighth notes into 16th notes, which there are a possibility of 16 16th notes in a measure. We did not record Romantic to a metronome, but it's around 92 beats per minute, or BPM as it is commonly said. So for the first section, you're gonna play, I would say, my Desert Island rock beat. I love this beat. It is the constant eighth notes on the kick drum. Not actually all that constant because you're not playing it on the 2 and 4 where the snare is being played. I'll explain this now because it only really needs to be said once. If you're having trouble with any type of drum beat, I find it's really helpful to think of it in a way where you only have 4 limbs. So you can only be playing 4 things at one time, and if you separate a drum beat, you maybe put a divider between each beat and you look at it, you can kind of look at it as a grid and go, oh, well, I'm playing, my right hand on the crash and my right foot on the kick in this beat, and then it's just the hi-hat and just the snare in this beat. And you can kind of do it in that way and break it down. It's really helpful when you're doing 16th note patterns and you kind of see where things line up, but maybe look at it that way if you're having trouble. You start the song as one typically does with a kick drum and a crash. I play 2 crashes. Well, I play a crash cymbal and a ride. I have 2 cymbals usually. I just happen to play them both in a crashing manner to come into the song. And you don't have to. You can play 1 cymbal, you can play 2 cymbals to come into the beat, but just play a crash and a kick. It's pretty quick between the transition from the crash to the hi-hat. You're playing a kick drum on the and of 1. So you're going in from the beat, the downbeat, the 1, with the bass drum. You play a bass drum on its own, nothing else, the and of 1, and then you come in with the hi-hat and the snare drum on beat 2. Then that's where your hi-hat and your kick drum start to get locked into that constant eighth note thing. So you're going to be playing the kick drum on the and of 2, beat 3, and the and of 3. And you're also going to be playing the hi-hat on those same beats. So crash, kick, snare drum and hi-hat, and 3 and. Then you do the snare and the hi-hat on beat 4, and then the and of 4 with the hi-hat and the kick drum. So then the second measure, we come into the, again, this will be long-winded since the beginning of the video. We do these hits a few times in the song. Once I explain it this time, I'm not going to go through the same explanation each and every time. Here's where the interesting hits are. They are still in 4/4. They kind of just sound weird, but it's still in the 4/4 time signature. The hits are going to be on 3, the and of 3, and the and of 4. So I'll just kind of clap them out just so you can kind of hear the counting and placement. 3 and 3 and. So on those hits, we're doing something that is called a flam, which is one of the drum rudiments, and a drum rudiment is just a common sticking. There's a bunch of them, and even if you don't know what rudiments are, you've been playing them if you play drums. So for a flam, you are playing both your right and your left hands, not at the same time like a unison, like a build-up. You're playing one of them ever so slightly softer. So, start really dramatic, pay attention to where you're keeping your stick heights are starting from different points, and one will just hit the drum a little bit before the other one. And, kind of make it dramatic when you're practicing if you've never played it before, but you'll just get used to it. Now that we know what a flam is, we can get back to this second measure. I swear everything else should go quicker now that we have some basics out of the way. And you're playing the kind of constant kick groove for the first 2 beats, and then we get to these hits, it's flam. Then you play a crash with the kick drum on the end of 3, and you're just playing the rack tom and floor tom together on the end of 4. Third measure, you start with a crash, you go back to that constant kick drum groove. So to exit this section on measure 4, we play that constant kick drum groove for the first 2 beats. Then we're playing a flam on beat 3 with a crash and kick on the end of 3, and then we rest until the next measure. So let's tackle a lot of ground here. You start this with a kick drum and a crash, and then you're playing 8th notes on the ride. With the 2 and 4, you're playing just the hi-hat pedal. And you do this for 8 measures. So on the 8th measure, you play a kick drum on the and of 4 to lead us into this next type of beat. So keeping with the 8th notes on the ride and the 2 and 4 with the hi-hat pedal, you're gonna start to incorporate the cross stick. So instead of how we typically hold our drumstick like this, with the cross stick method, we are going to place our drumstick flat on the snare drum head so that we can hit the rim. Watch the video, it should be pretty clear. You'll get the hang of it. After transitioning from playing just the ride and the hi-hat, this cross stick section, we've started with the and 1 and then the cross stick. Cross sticks are going to happen on the 2 and 4s of each beat, but the bass drum is not going to come back in again until the second measure of the cross stick part with another and 1. And then we have one more measure with no kick, and then we go into 2 measures where the kick is on 1 and 3, again cross sticks still on 2 and 4. And then we're doing a build-up, which is going to be 8th notes, kick drum, hi-hat, and ride, crashing on the ride for a full measure, and then half a measure. So on the second measure of the build-up, you're building up 1 and 2 and 3, and then we get into a little fill. It starts on the and of 3, and it starts with a flam, and it's and a 4 and so flam, left, right, left. So then we're going to go into a kind of chorusy part. You come in with, play both cymbals or whatever to signify like a crash sound, but you're also crashing on the ride. And we're just going to do that same constant 8th note kick drum pattern for a measure. And then we have that same constant kick drum 8th note pattern crashing on the ride for half a measure. And then we're going to do the hits, a flam on beat 3, and then you do a crash with a kick, and then we're going to play the and of 4. We're going to play the snare, the hi-hat. You crash back into the crashing on the ride with the constant 8th note kicks for another measure, and then we do another kind of lead into a pause thing. 2 8th notes with the crash ride and the kick drum, and then you're going to start a little fill. So you're going to play the crash ride and the snare on beat 2. There is a flam on the snare on the and of 2, followed by your left hand playing the snare on the of 2, your right hand playing the snare on beat 3, and then you play the crash and kick on the and of 3, and then we will rest until the next measure. So we're going to crash into this next section on beat 1 with a kick drum. That should be a pretty, obvious transition trend by now. And this is going to be a groove with the cross stick on beats 2 and 4. You're playing 8th notes on the ride, and you're playing kick drum on beats 1, and you're playing them on the and of 2 and on beat 3. We're going to do that groove for a total of 8 measures. Then for the next 4 measures, you are leading in again with the crash, and you're playing the same patterns on the hi-hat pedal, on the ride cymbal, and the kick drum, but you're taking the cross stick out. On that 4th measure, you're going to play kind of a lead in to just pick up the pace, and that's just, you're going to play the hi-hat just on 4 and you do a little kind of buzz roll, like single-handed buzz roll to get into just playing a beat. So you're just letting your stick bounce on the snare drum, not in a controlled manner where you'd be playing a double, but you're just letting it roll. For the next 2 measures, you have now played, you're done with the cross stick, you're just playing regular snare. And we're gonna play eighth notes on the ride, but you're gonna crescendo, you're gonna get louder incrementally throughout these two measures. Drum pattern remains the same, snares on 2 and 4. Then for one measure, we're going to play a build-up on the crash ride and the snare and the bass drum. You're going to play the first note of that build-up a little louder than all the rest. So for things like this build-up and kind of random times I don't even notice I'm doing it, sometimes I play the hi-hat pedal. You can use it, you don't have to. I might even forget to mention some of the times I play it. Just a little like timekeeping thing I do. Feel free to incorporate it if you want, if you feel like it keeps you in better time. A lot of the times you don't even hear it. Now we've come to the big fill. So there are 30-second notes in here. I looked up on YouTube how to count 30-second notes and I didn't find any good answers. I am not sure. But you could think of it like you are just adding another note to a 16th note. So the beginning of this fill is where the 30-second note is, and it's on the E of 1. You could think of the 30-second note just kind of being a double on the E if you were playing a whole single stroke roll. I'll kind of show you what that looks like. For the fill, I don't even play the same thing live, I think once. You just kind of have to get the basic rhythm, which is just 1 E-anda, 2 E-anda, 3 E-anda, 4 E-anda. And yeah, but I'll try to figure out what I played on the record. So you're coming out of the build-up, you play the first beat on the crash, kick, and snare. For the E of 1, that's where the kind of double note happens. Those are both played on the snare. For the anda of 1, you're playing the snare with your right hand, and then you play the hi-hat on the of 1 with your left hand. 2 E and you're playing on the snare, right, left, right. The of 2 is where you're going to start moving to the rack tom. You play the floor tom with the kick drum on beat 3, followed by a kick drum on the E of 3, and then you play a flam on the and of 3. Beat 4, you play a snare drum, so you'll kind of hear a double snare hit with the flam, and then you're playing the snare drum on beat 4. The rack tom is on the E of 4, followed by a floor tom on the and of 4, and then the kick drum on the of 4. So basically we are starting on the snare for the first 2 beats. On the of 2, we're moving to the rack tom, floor tom, and then rack and floor again in the middle of beat 4. It's only 2 tom beats, rack, floor. So then you crash back into crashing on the ride with that constant 8th note kick drum pattern. You stay on that pattern for half of the measure, and then you play a flam on beat 3, followed by a crash with a kick on the and of 3, and a flam on its own on the and of 4. We go back into the crashing on the ride constant 8th note kick pattern, again kind of leading into a fill. We do just 1 and on the kick, and then the snare on 2 with crashing on the ride. Will be a flam on the and of 2, followed by left right on the snare for the of 2 and beat 3, followed by a crash with the kick drum on the and of 3, and then we play a fill in the rhythm 4 E-anda to lead out of this part. It's going to be a flam on beat 4, a kick drum on the E of 4, your rack tom and floor tom together on the and of 4, and then a kick drum on the of 4. Again, you crash back into the crashing on the ride constant 8th note kick pattern. And then we have another fill. The trick on this one is to realize it starts with a crash and then goes to the hi-hat. On beat 1, you have a crash with a kick drum, and then on the end of 1, it is a hi-hat and snare together. You're then playing a snare drum on beat 2, so it creates another kind of double snare hit in the fill. And then with your left hand, you play the rack tom on the E of 2, you play the floor tom and the kick together on the and of 2, and then you play just the kick drum on the of 2. We have a crash with a snare drum on beat 3, followed by another snare drum hit on the and of 3, which is then followed by your left hand moving to the rack tom to play the of 3. Play the floor tom with the kick drum on beat 4, the kick drum on its own on the E of 4, followed by a flam on the and of 4, and then a kick drum on the of 4. And we go back to the crash ride, constant 8th note kick drum pattern, rock beat. Play that for another half a measure, and then we have the hits. Again, flam on beat 3, crash and kick on the and of 3, and then another just flam on the snare on the and of 4. Go back to crashing on the ride, playing that constant 8th note kick drum groove. Then very similar to before, we're playing the 1 and on the kick drum, crashing on the ride, the snare and the ride on beat 2, and then we go into another little fill. You're going to play a flam on the and of 2, followed by your left hand playing the snare on the of 2. Your right hand plays beat 3 on the snare, followed by a crash with a kick drum on the and of 3, and then we'll play a flam on beat 4, followed by a just tom hit on the and of 4. And you also play a kick drum on the and of 4 with that tom. And then it's back to crashing on the ride, playing that constant 8th note kick beat. And on this measure, we're actually kind of starting the fill on beat 4. So I would think of the starting point of this fill with the crash and the kick drum on the and of 4, and then you're playing the of 4 with a bass drum too. You'll play a crash and a snare on beat 1, followed by the floor tom on the and of 1, followed by the rack tom on the of 1, followed by a floor tom on beat 2 with a kick drum. So floor tom, rack tom, floor tom. You'll have a kick drum on the E of beat 2, followed by a snare and crash on the and of beat 2. And then a kick and crashing on the ride on beat 3, followed by a snare drum on the E of 3. So crashing on the ride with a kick drum on beat 3, followed by a snare drum on the E of 3, followed by a kick drum, and the crashing on the ride on the and of 3, followed by a kick drum on the of 3. So you can kind of think of it playing like a little beat in the middle of this fill. So we come out of this fill playing a flam on beat 4, followed by right left on the snare, which will be playing and of the 4. and then we go back into the crashing on the ride, constant 8th note kick pattern. Again, you play that for another half measure, followed by the hits, which for the end of the songs, it's just consistently playing the snare flam on beat 3, followed by the crash with the ride on the and of 3, followed by just a snare drum flam on the and of 4. And you'll repeat that same thing one more time. So then we move into the final part of the song. For the final part of the song, we come in with the crash and kick drum again, and then we're playing 8th notes on the floor tom, and we're playing 1 on the kick drum, and then we're also playing the and of 2 on the kick drum and 3 on the kick drum. Snares on 2 and 4. In the second measure with the floor tom and kick on the and of 2, directly after that, you're going to play a flam on beat 3, followed by you're going to play the ride cymbal lightly, like just a ride cymbal with a kick on the end of 3. Then you're going to play the hi-hat with your foot on beat 4, followed by a flam on the snare on the end of 4. We're going to play the same groove that we started with for this section, but we're going to, instead of crashing into it, play a gentle ride note. So to end the song, you go from playing the floor tom and bass drum on the and of 2 to playing a flam on beat 3 to playing a crash with a kick on the and of 3, and that's where the song ends. Hopefully now you feel like you know how to play the song. If you need any further help or have any questions about things, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, DM me at Kayleen Drums, or even send me an email, kwriting23@gmail.com. I'll be happy to answer your drum questions.